And we are rolling. Mr. Orion Taraban, thank you very much for joining me, sir. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having me on, Richard. I've been a fan for a long time, so this is a treat for me.
Thank you. Dr. Orion Taraban is a clinical psychologist and content creator with a significant presence on YouTube, where he shares insights on relationships, motivation, resilience, and emotional growth. He has appeared on podcasts such as Modern Wisdom, where he discussed mental resilience and hacking your psychology to become more emotionally robust. This is the type of psychology I like. His YouTube content includes multi-part videos on topics like thoughts on love and marriage, elaborating on communication, boundaries, and emotional dynamics in relationships. Before we dive into the subject of narcissism, do you mind if I ask you where you studied, how you got into psychology?
Oh, sure. Absolutely. Would you like me to tell you a little bit of the origin story?
Yes, sir. Please.
I'll try to be brief. So those who follow my work know that I wasn't always a psychologist. I was actually a professional actor for most of my teens and 20s. I decided that the bohemian life wasn't for me, and I decided to switch gears in my late 20s. I moved to the Bay Area in California and entered into a grad school program there. It was nothing special. For me, grad school was a means to get a degree so that I could get a license to open up my private practice. My goal was always to have a private practice and hang out my own shingle, which I did a few years after graduating. So it took about 7 or 8 years to make that transition from New York actor to California-based psychologist. When I opened my practice, well, shortly after I opened my practice, I decided to focus primarily on men's mental health. So all of my patients at the time were men, which I felt was an underserved population and continues to be an underserved population in clinical psychology. So I worked with a lot of men for many, many years, and I was pleased by the work. I think being a therapist is a phenomenal job. I think it's the best job in the world. It certainly suits me and my personality really well. And I was pleased that it seemed like the people I was working with seemed to be improving, like they seemed to be having higher qualities of life, better relationships, more successful professionally, et cetera, et cetera. And on some level, there's something somewhat isolating about being a therapist. You never even get to see a colleague work. And when you have a success, you can't really tell anybody about it. That's the nature of the profession. That said, while it's no small thing to help out 20, 30 people in a significant way, I was convinced that if the interventions that I was using on these men worked for these 30 individuals, they might work for 30 million individuals. Who knows? So that was my inspiration, my incentive to move into YouTube. I wanted to reach a platform where I might be able to have a greater impact for good and to reach more men. And here we are today. I've been on YouTube now for over 4 years, and it's been more successful than my wildest expectations.
That's excellent. That's excellent. The subject of narcissism is trending now. It has been trending for several years. Do you think the actual clinical incidence of narcissistic personality disorder would be commensurate with the trend for people to become interested in narcissism as a subject? Or do you think there's a bit of a mismatch?
So I think what you're asking me is, like, does the popularity of narcissism match the prevalence of narcissism in the population?
Yeah.
No, I don't think it does.
Yeah.
It
was such a blatantly trick question.
That said, it must be popular for a reason. And I do think that the official epidemiological estimates are probably almost certainly too low. And they're too low for a number of reasons. First of all, if you go to the DSM and you look up NPD, you're only going to get what we might call the grandiose flavor of narcissism. This is the person who has delusions of grandeur, believes that he or she is the exception to every rule in a positive way, feels entitled and deserving to sex and power and wealth and all kinds of goodies. And there are certainly people out there like that, but I don't think that's the only way that narcissism can manifest. It also seems to be a very gendered expression of narcissism. In fact, one of my, as I'm sure you're aware, narcissism, NPD, is one of 4 cluster B personality disorders. And there's a lot of overlap between those 4. They are comorbid in a great deal of cases, so it's difficult to know where one ends and the other begins. And I've read some interesting research that suggests that BPD, borderline personality disorder, and NPD, as it's primarily understood as I just described, might be gendered expressions of the same underlying disorder, which would explain why men are differentially diagnosed with grandiose NPD far more often than women, and women are far more often diagnosed with BPD than men are.
Yes, to your point, it seems like fragile or covert narcissism isn't particularly well studied or well understood.
No.
And maybe where that crosses over into the descriptions of BPD is an area of research that needs quite a bit of work on.
My hunch is that if and when the APA comes out with DSM-6, we're going to see narcissistic abuse or different flavors of narcissism in that manual at that time, but that could be another decade away. It is interesting because you can certainly, it doesn't take much imagination to see how, for example, being the exception to every rule, which is one of the traditional criterion for NPD, can be both positive and negative. Like the Grandiose thinks that he or she is the exception to every rule, that I should get the special treatment. But you might say like an inverted narcissist was a negative exception to that rule, is that like, I'm so bad, I'm so broken, I'm so flawed that no treatment could help me. I'm completely hopeless. Not even God could use his power to effect a constructive change. That's how special I am. I'm damaged in a special way. And this is interesting because it harkens back to another interesting study I read in grad school in the context of my assessment training, specifically around cognitive assessments like IQ tests. It turns out that people are much more depressed when you tell them they have average intelligence than below average intelligence. Like people would rather be special in a negative way than just average. And so if you can't be special in a positive way, then, which a lot of people despair of doing, then potentially you can be special in a negative way.
Yeah. Well, if it's, you said that it's probably underdiagnosed, it's probably a gendered diagnosis. So the prevalence in Gen Pop is probably higher than what we currently think. But even with that being said, the number of people saying that they're the targets of narcissistic abuse still wouldn't quite tally, as I understood, if I understood what you're saying.
No, that's what I was saying. So I do think that the official estimate is probably too low, but if you go on social media, it seems like everybody is dealing with narcissism or trauma. That's another big one. Or they have ADHD. So these things are real. Like they definitely impact people. They're not fabrications. But for better or for worse, when they entered into the popular consciousness, I think that they expanded beyond the clinical and reasonable definition. And it's very easy to understand why, because there's a long tradition of using medicalized language morally and with the intention to shame. Now, I see this a lot in sort of like a thought terminating way when I conduct sessions or consultations. Sometimes I'll be speaking to a person and they'll just tell me that, oh, well, my ex was a narcissist. And the idea in that communication, as I understand it, is I'm not to ask any more questions. I'm just to align myself with the perception that this was a bad person, and that's all I need to know about that person. So when a person talks in this way, I generally kind of bristle, because I'd like to make up my own mind about whether the person is narcissistic or not, or whether the person is traumatized or not. So I want to ask questions as to like, what was the behavior, what were the incidents that led the person to that conclusion? And sometimes it's justified and sometimes it's not. It's very easy to work backwards, because it's like, for example, sorry to interrupt, Richard. It's like in a certain communication that I remember, a person said, oh, I was dating a narcissist. Okay, well, tell me more about why you think that. Well, that person was gaslighting me. Okay, so that's already another trigger word for oh, well, in that case, all gaslighters are narcissists, so I don't need to ask any more questions. Okay, so what exactly was the gaslighting? Oh, well, we were talking about an event, and he said that this didn't happen, and I know that it did. It's like, is it possible that you had two different memories of the event? Like, I'm not, and this can come off as invalidating of the person's experience, of course. Why are you taking my ex's side? I'm telling you that I'm right and they're wrong, which of course is kind of narcissistic. So that's why it's really tricky to get into this, because narcissism is a hall of mirrors. And people who have been touched by narcissists in a malignant way can often become narcissists in their own victimization. And that's on some level how the pathology spreads as a contagion. It's a defense against being harmed. And in a sense, the core of most narcissism is, I've been hurt so much in the past, therefore I'm justified in potentially putting myself first, even if it means hurting or exploiting others. And every narcissist starts as a victim. Whether or not that is let's say, a legitimate victim is up for a question, but they're certainly a victim in their own mind.
Fascinating. I have so many questions. I'm going to come back to the questions about narcissism, but just to explore your position a little bit more and help people to understand what your position is. When people go for psychotherapy, largely, I mean, I have a therapist I see weekly. What I pay him for is to help me map my internal world and to help me see my blind spots and to explore my narratives of what I believe to be true, in the hopes that we can get to actual truth. Would you agree largely that's a major function of the psychotherapeutic dialogue?
It can be a major function. It's difficult to know what is fundamental truth. I try to define that as being more aligned with reality. And so
Yep.
maybe we're just splitting hairs here. So the question is, well, how does one know whether one is aligned with reality? And my answer to that is, your life works. It's like, we know that our understanding is aligned with, let's say, the fundamental laws of aerodynamics because our planes can fly. If our planes aren't flying, then our models of reality are wrong. So like, on some level, effectiveness, your life works, your relationships work, your businesses work, on some level means that you're aligned with reality, because it's extremely difficult to perpetually be successful in all these different domains just by sheer dumb luck or coincidence. Right.
I've not heard it expressed that way before. I really like that. That's a very good measure of whether somebody's aligned with reality or not.
But that's interesting because your sorry to interrupt, but your model, it suggests that you would desire your therapist to potentially challenge you if this person believes that you're not seeing reality clearly. And a lot of therapists are loath to do that. Because
that's a problem.
It is. There's an unwritten rule in a lot of therapeutic training that the understanding, the awareness must arise organically in the client or the patient. It can't be just handed over on a silver platter. And on some level, there's some truth to that. If I tell you something and you're not ready to or willing to hear it, it's going to be useless to you. But I do think that therapists often waste a great deal of time by not being directive and not being challenging.
Yes. Yeah, I'm definitely not paying a therapist weekly to validate my pre-existing view of reality. I wouldn't. That's just being patted on the back and told they're there, it's all okay.
Well, a lot of people do, though they might not pay any longer. This is an interesting topic for consideration. One of I think the first or the second most common use today of ChatGPT is for emotional support. People are using chat as a validating therapist. And let me tell you, chat is a good Like, if you don't give it the right prompts, if you don't tell it to challenge you explicitly and consistently, it will just completely support whatever perspective or decision that you have. It can be very validating. Maybe that serves a function in some people's lives, but I do think it's creating probably 1 billion personal halls of mirrors where our individual perspective is just being repeated back to us in an AI form. And I don't think that's going to lead to deeper understanding and more alignment with reality.
No, I would think it would lead to mass scale psychosis.
Well, yeah. I mean, doesn't that explain kind of what you're seeing? I mean, if most people in the world were healthy and mature and stable, the world would not look the way that it looked.
Okay, I agree. So before you said, sometimes people will come into therapy and they will say, look, I want to have a conversation with you. And it's on the basis that my father-in-law is a psychopathic inverted narcissist with a dash of BPD. Now, Dr. Orion, let me tell you what happened. And then that's fait accompli. And I have a problem with that in the same way that when sometimes I used to do coaching for people years ago, and they'd come to me and they'd say, my problem is I have insomnia. And then you'd get 3 sessions in and you'd be like, that's not your problem. The insomnia is a problem.
You have a cocaine addiction.
I swear, in that individual case, the person was consuming 12 cans of Diet Coke a day, and they didn't tell me until session 3. And I was like, why? Do you not see the correlation? No. It's a lot of caffeine running through your system. 12 cans of Diet Coke a day is. So I was younger. I was a little bit more naive. It's just to this point of reality, as you define it, as you can test it with functionality and effectiveness versus delusion. I also have had the experience, not in therapy, but in seminars where people tell me a story and they'll be like, my father-in-law has, they give me their diagnosis and they go, now I'm going to continue with my story. And I don't like it either, because in my head, I'm thinking, well, is it responsible for me to just accept that that's the case? Shouldn't I challenge you on that a little bit? Could you talk more to that, actually challenging clients as being the role of a therapist?
Well, I think that it is, because my goal is to help people get what they want and to get them out of my office as quickly as possible, because it's not like I'm in need of the work at this point. So if they knew how to do that, they wouldn't be in my fucking office, Richard. Like, that's the fact of the matter. Like, if they could do it on their own, they would have done it by now. According to some study that I read, the average American lives with a psychological problem for 10 years before he or she seeks professional help. If they could have done it, they would have done it by now. So by not being directive, by not jumping in and challenging the basis of their failure or their pain or their struggle, I become complicit in their suffering. Even worse, I'm exploiting them because I'm gaining financially from their continued problem on some level. Which is one of the fundamental, it's been a perennial critique of psychotherapy for as long as it's existed, is why cure the patient? You're out another customer on some level. But to what you're saying is, I do become a little suspicious when someone comes in and they use very explicit therapeutic language. That always causes me to raise a little bit of a yellow flag. Because, like I said, I think that's used as a shortcut for me to align with their version of reality without asking any more questions. And some people can be very, they're like professional patients. I remember, for example, I worked my first 2 years of training at a chemical dependency outpatient clinic. And this is where I learned very clearly that insight does not cause people to change. I worked with some hard, inveterate alcoholics who had been through several treatment programs, in and out of rehab, who have gone to AA for decades, who could tell me their family story. They could tell me, they could do a very insightful chain analysis of their relapse. They could speak knowledgeably about all their triggers and how their childhood insecurity surges in this moment. And but they still drink. They still drink. Like it's on some level, it's even worse to have insight. It's like being a self-aware but deterministic computer. It's like you know how you function, but you feel powerless to change it. Versus some guy will come in, very low insight, and say, yeah, I decided I just want to quit drinking. Well, why? Well, I figure it doesn't make me feel good. So I decided I just won't put the beer in my mouth anymore. And that guy gets better. You don't need to know why you drink to stop drinking. You need to stop drinking to stop drinking. You don't need to know why you're depressed to not be depressed. You need to start doing stop doing the things that are making you to be depressed and start doing the things that will change that. It's action that changes people. Insight can help, but it's insufficient to do it at the end of the day.
Okay, I agree with you, but what you just said, wouldn't that be considered somewhat sacrilegious in the school of psychotherapy that you were trained in?
Oh yeah, I mean, like I'm not a typical therapist. I'm not, which is why I'm effective.
That's why it works. Okay, I think when people, they watch an interview like this, and I think I should address it here. There's an idea of what psychology is. Psychology, psychotherapy. There's an idea of psychology. And I've run into this with people, smart people, even academics. They think I went and did a degree in psychology, and they think that I was studying therapy and how to help people analyze their dreams. I was doing rats in T-shaped mazes. I did behavioral psychology. It was incredibly boring. Some of it was useful. I mean, they put me through a system that I think the best that came out of it is I'm not scared of reading academic papers. I don't mind reading academic papers, but other than that, it really didn't help with narcissistic abuse and psychoanalytic theory. And then there's the idea of psychology and psychotherapy and what psychotherapy is, and a lot of it will just come from TV. Would you agree that, largely speaking, the way it's represented in the mass media is maybe a little bit confusing or misleading for people?
Sure. I mean, but it's also a very strange profession because I've never seen another therapist work. I don't know if there's any other profession in the world where you don't get to see someone else do their job. Like you see firemen put out fires. You watch surgeons perform operations. You watch teachers and you shadow teachers or salesmen. It's like you can see people do things, but I've never actually watched someone else conduct a real therapy session. Like in training, they'll have videos of like, actors who are trying to simulate being patients. So no one really knows what it's supposed to look like. That's why, for lack of a better model, I spent the first 2 or 3 years of my professional training trying to be my therapist, because that was the only therapeutic model I had as a professional. And it turns out that we are diametrically opposed to each other with respect to our approaches to therapy. And that wasn't like intentional. I thought I was going to follow in his footsteps. He was a Jungian dream analyst. He was psychodynamically oriented. I would call him up and I'd talk a little bit about my life and I'd share my dream and we'd interpret it together. And I found it to be really interesting and helpful from the very first session. So that's also something that's important to know, is that I don't buy into the marketing scheme that you have to do therapy for several months for it to start to take effect. You should get something from the very first session. And I did with this man. And I worked with him for several years. And I thought that's who I'm going to be. I'm going to be a Jungian dream analyst. And it turns out I'm basically as far away from that as you could possibly be and still call yourself a therapist. And because it took a while for me to develop my own clinical voice, especially in the absence of any other models to imitate or emulate.
So did you effectively come up with your own individual model that you operate from that's
It's a
not based on
mishmash.
what you were taught?
In this, I mean, it's a mishmash. It's like I call what I do therapeutic coaching, because it combines the clinical training I've had as a psychotherapist with being like directive, action-oriented advice. So I take a lot from, let's say, CBT broadly defined. I love DBT. I love ACT. With a very strong B, behavioral component, because in order to feel better, you generally have to do better on some level. If you're just going to think that you're going to improve by talking to me 1 hour a week and then keeping the rest of your life the same, you're mistaken. Most of the change is going to happen outside of the counseling room, and I'm here to just prepare you for that change and the pain that you're going to experience in that change.
Have you helped therapeutically coached using your system? Have you helped people who've been the targets of what you would understand to be an actual narcissist?
Oh, sure. And what I've discovered is it's the people who don't even know what narcissism is that are most able to benefit from the framework of, let's say, narcissistic abuse. It helps to make sense of their experience. Most people have never been in a relationship with a personality disordered individual. And until you've been in a relationship with a personality disordered individual, you don't know how fucking crazy life can be. You just think that something doesn't make sense. Like, do we need to work on our communication? Like, did I screw up here? Because a normal person would never say one thing and do this other thing. Another person wouldn't change so significant. Another person wouldn't. It's like the relationship doesn't make sense. And if you continue to try to treat that disordered individual or that disordered relationship like a normal individual, a normal relationship, you're going to go down this slow rabbit hole where your life is going to get darker and darker and darker. Now, once we introduce the idea that maybe this is not a normal individual, maybe this is a person with very deep-seated problems, so deep-seated that they can't even see them because the problem is the seer, and that we can't actually expect someone who's disordered at that level. I mean, so hold on, let me pause there, because that's already a very tough sell for a lot of people. People don't want to believe that there are some individuals that are so deeply damaged that they're incapable of like the kind of relationship they'd like to have with them, that they're incapable potentially of being happy, that they're incapable potentially of meaningful change, barring some sort of like divine intervention or near-death experience or something like that. Like, it takes a lot to cause fundamental personality change. It's not easy. So most people are kind of good. You know, they're not really extremely virtuous. They're not really extremely bad. They probably think they're a little bit better than they are. They're mostly harmless. And so they think that all people are kind of like that. All people are basically good, you know? And until you actually deal with a bad actor, or there's the other stereotype, is that the evil people all have like the handlebar mustaches and, you know, the scars on their faces. And it's very easy to spot who those people are. They certainly don't look attractive. They certainly don't look beautiful. They certainly shouldn't be intelligent and charming. Because the good guys always win. So they must be less intelligent and they must be less capable than the virtuous people who we all tend to identify with. So it can be blindsided, especially in a romantic relationship where most people are led by their attraction, which is already a form of delusion. So I guess what my point is that people can be complicit in their own abuse. because they allowed their attraction to run away from them, because they put their models of reality ahead of reality. They said, I should be able to have this type of relationship with this person without knowing the type of person that they're dealing with or knowing how relationships work, by not having appropriate boundaries, by not walking away when things started to get aggressive or neglectful. So there is the danger that once people begin to learn about narcissism, and they begin to see themselves as a victim. Now, that can be temporarily relieving, and maybe that is a necessary step towards healing and recovering from that situation. Because until that, most people are just like left with confusion and self-recrimination, which might be inappropriate. So by positing the self that, no, I was actually dealing with a bad actor who acted badly, that could be a way of getting out from underneath the pain and the shame of that relationship. But of course, I don't think that we should stay there. And if people several years down the road are still talking about, I survived narcissistic abuse at the hands of this covert, inverted, it's like, at some point, you got to let it go. And I think people perpetuate that language because a big part of being in a relationship with a narcissist is that no one really believes you. No one really believes how crazy this person acts behind closed doors. In fact, some narcissists are very good at showing the world a very different face than they reveal in private. And some things that happen in real life are stranger than fiction. They'll make soap operas look tame by comparison. And so one of the crazy making aspects of being in a relationship with a narcissist in particular is that when you begin to open up about your experience, people don't believe you. And so I think that people who have this experience gravitate potentially towards folks like you, who give their experience a name and aren't necessarily, they're going to like believe that they dealt with these things, whereas maybe their friends and family couldn't or didn't. And that is, it helps to make sense of their situation, but it can also keep them stuck. So it's a double-edged sword.
Yes. You mentioned before getting people out of your office. In my experience, it's easy to get people in. It's much, much harder to get them back out at the other side. I would say that's been the biggest challenge I've had in the last 12 years, is to get people to move forward after narcissistic abuse. Yeah.
Well, you have excellent marketing then, Richard, because most people do not have that problem.
That's true. Yeah. Yes. From a capitalistic point of view, that's great. From the therapeutic point of view, it's a difficult one. There seems to be something about that type of experience where it affects people's identity in such a deep and painful way that then becomes the identity. So whatever identity they had before is no longer accessible. And I've not cracked the code on that. I don't know what to do with that. Whether perhaps a large part of the exercise of recovery is to recreate the identity, or to retrieve the identity in some way. I'm open to feedback on that one. Not sure what you think about that.
Yeah, it is dangerous when an identity crystallizes around a victimization or a trauma, because that person becomes increasingly an object. Things happen to that person, or things happened to that person. They're not even happening in the present anymore. They happened, and that was that. Subjectivity is moving towards the I and embracing the will, which is creative self-development. It's away from the me. He did this to me. She abused me. And moving more towards the I. I choose to be this or to do that. So that's one thing. I'm also reminded of a strategy that Marsha Linehan used, the creator of dialectical behavior therapy, who worked with a lot of borderlines. And she would form very intimate, intense attachments to her patients sometimes, because her patients were very passionate and individuals. And they were with somebody who didn't give them up as a hopeless cause, which was generally the therapeutic response to BPD until DBT came along. So borderlines really liked Marcia. And so sometimes they didn't want to get better because they were afraid that if they got better, they would lose access to her. And so her strategy for that was, she was really masterful in this, was to kind of turn it on her head. And she would tell these clients, actually, if you're not getting better, then I have an ethical responsibility to terminate the treatment because clearly it's not working and I don't want to just continue to take your money and waste your time. So if you're not improving, if you're not hitting your benchmarks every week, I'm going to have to refer you to somebody else. And that shakes them up. And so in order for them to continue to have access to her, they have to keep meeting their behavioral targets.
That's very smart. That's very, very smart.
Mm-hmm. She still is. She's alive. She's a very smart woman.
Very, very smart. I looked into on and off over the years dialectical behavioral therapy. I thought it's a great system for dealing with borderline personality disorder, and incidentally, it seems to be, to my eyes, a good system for dealing with complex post-traumatic stress. Almost as though the two are neighbors; they're adjacent to each other in some sense.
That's another line of research that BPD is really just CPTSD. Right. That's the pathogenesis of borderline personality disorder is complex PTSD from childhood.
I want to go down that road with you, but I also need to. I'm thinking about of the audience as well. So let's go to this. If somebody shows up and you think this person's been dealing with narcissistic abuse, they have epistemological humility. They've not just dropped this into my lap fait accompli. I've actually had to discover. You, Dr. Ryan, has to discover. Yes, this sounds like it's highly like. Obviously, you can't diagnose secondhand, but you're thinking to yourself, that's highly likely to be a PD. Is there a particular modality or methodology that you lean towards to help people to recover from that above all others?
I don't know. I do think that if it becomes clear that let me say this first. At some point, it's not really necessary to diagnose the other person, especially when it comes to splitting hairs. Like, is it a
sorry? You said it's not really necessary. Is it necessary at all? Is that for somebody's therapeutic advancement? Is it necessary at all to diagnose them? Sorry to cut you off there.
No, it's not. It can be useful to some people because it helps to organize their experience in a way that would otherwise be confusing and inchoate. But no, ultimately is not necessary. It's not necessary to know whether the partner is NPD or BPD or what flavor of NPD the partner is. What is necessary is to determine whether or not the person you can have the kind of relationship that you want with that person. Whether the relationship or interacting with this person is helping you meet your goals or contributing to your happiness, or is detracting in significant ways from your quality of life and is exacerbating your suffering. You can call it, is the person toxic to you? And if so, you just fucking leave. Like, you get out of the relationship. So that's the most important part of healing. Like, you cannot continue, like, you're going to have insomnia as long as you're drinking the Coke. You know, you can't begin to feel better if every day you're coming home to this toxic environment. And there may be limits to what you can accomplish, because obviously we can't change the other person. We could potentially motivate some kind of change, because let's assume you're in a system with this person, and the way a system works is that all the parts are interrelated. So if you change one part, it forces a shift in the others. So if the individual that I'm talking to begins to change or show up into the relationship differently, it's going to force the partner to change in certain ways, but we can't necessarily predict how that person is going to respond, but they will have to change in some way. That said, it could take years to evoke meaningful change, and it may not be enough. Like, not every relationship can be saved, just like not every person can be saved. I know that sounds really cruel, but no doctor believes that they can save the life of everyone who comes into their hospital. If the person fell from a 40-story building and is basically in a mason jar when they come into the ER, that person isn't going to live. Like, we kind of accept that on some level, but we have this belief that like all interior wounds should be healable, that they should be transcendable, that everyone should be able to be a good person, which basically means to do what I think that they should do, more or less.
Yes.
And that's not true. No one would expect somebody with a broken leg to be able to sprint. But people expect folks with a very significant disordered personality to be able to love. And that's not possible. The issue is you have to kind of take my word for it. You can see a broken leg. We can run an X-ray and identify the fracture. It's harder to do that with psychological issues. They're revealed more or less by their behavior, their syndromes. And it's even more confusing because you see people aren't like universally evil or bad or broken. Like, BPDs can be calm and ordered. NPDs can show consideration for others at times. And so you see, well, clearly they can do that, just like the depressive can laugh. And the anxious person can reassure him or herself. It's like they can do the thing that they need to do to solve the problem, but they don't. At least not consistently or satisfactorily for my liking, the person in question's liking.
Sure. So, a little bit of a controversial question then. I think what I'm hearing, Dr. Ryan, is that you think some sort of ideology has infected psychotherapy. That it sounds like an ideological infection when you say there seems to be this belief that everybody is salvageable. Do you see that as a sort of an ideological possession?
I don't see that so much among psychologists. I see that among the lay population. I think that most of the psychologists that I personally know are much more realistic about the human potential and the human condition and relationships.
Could you introduce me to these psychologists? I'd love to.
Sure, I can.
I want to make friends with them.
Yeah, I know some really good therapists. I often get requests for. What was that?
I was just going to ask. They're obviously their ideas are based in reality.
Well, yeah, I would hope. Again, I've never seen them work, but I have spoken to them and I've consulted with them, and I do believe that their perspectives were grounded and effective. So that's the closest I can come to knowing that they're a good therapist. And I think that something changes. That was absolutely the most useful part of my training. I learned a lot of intellectually interesting things from my coursework, but it was really my internships and my practica, my supervised training, that helped me to become a therapist. And even more than that, it was the opportunity or the privilege to sit and listen to thousands and thousands of people. Like, if you just shut up and listen to thousands of people's stories, especially people who are very different from you, men and women, old and young, from all different walks of life, rich and poor, it's like you start to, a lot of your assumptions about who people are begin naturally to erode. And you might not even know what those assumptions are until they start to erode. But like, a lot of people, myself included, have ideas about the way people are that precede the individuals themselves. And that's a no-no as a therapist in many respects. Like, that's maybe the cardinal no-no, is that you have to listen. Now, people people aren't quite as unique and different than they might imagine themselves to be. Bless you.
Thank you.
There are certainly patterns that emerge when you begin to listen. Bless you.
Thank you.
Right. So, but I think the act of listening to people's stories taught me more than anything I read in a book.
Yes. I heard you say before that in the attraction phase of a relationship, a person is a bit delusional by
Well,
default.
yeah, by default. Yeah.
Tell me more.
Well, I'm sure that my hunch is that you agree with me, but you want me to extrapolate a bit. So, in my book,
Yes,
go ahead.
I do.
In my
I was
book, I
just gonna say,
talk
yes,
about,
I do agree with you.
I
Sorry.
talk about the crisis of disillusionment, which typically occurs around the 6 to 12 month point in a new relationship, which is where either some significant event happens or the accumulation of small discrepancies reaches a critical tipping point, and the illusion of who you think the other person is no longer sustainable given the preponderance of evidence that you've observed over the course of the relationship. And the illusion, the fantasy of that person, who you would like them to be, shatters. And this is tricky because so much of your attraction is based on that fantasy of their interiority. I was just working on a script before I called you today. Desire, attraction, is not based on interiority. It's superficial. It's a paradoxical superficial because it penetrates very deeply inside of a person. It goes to our genes, it goes to our unconscious mind, but it's based on, especially for men, observable physical and behavioral cues. And some of those cues can be, let's say, performed, they can be practiced, they could be manifested insincerely, or they could be representations of a true matching interiority. But in any case, you don't know who the other fucking person is. You just think that that person is hot, and that desire is what motivates you to take the time and effort to approach and to begin to learn about the other person, which is always a dangerous thing because fantasies cannot survive contact with reality. But here's the thing. Because I like what I see, I am going to project what I want to see more in you inside of you. Like whether I'm aware of it or not, I'm going to do that because I can't interact with you as if you were just a puppet, as just like this empty marionette. I have to fill you with something. And in the absence of actual evidence from you, I'm going to fill it with what I want to see because that's what my attraction is priming me to do. It's like the halo effect, right? Yeah. That said, either I have to continue to willfully turn a blind eye or bury my head in the sand or rationalize and justify the inconsistencies away, which, trust me, people do all the fucking time because they want to preserve that fantasy. They want to preserve that illusion as long as possible. But eventually, with enough familiarity, with enough knowledge of the person's actual interiority, the illusion shatters. And now you have to, and on some level, this is where the relationship actually begins. You weren't actually in a relationship with another person. You were in a relationship with your projections up until that point. At this point, you maybe can begin to see each other clearly. And this is where you have to make a decision on some level as to whether or not there is enough in reality to justify continuing the relationship. And a lot of people, there isn't. It's a tricky moment because you may be 6 months in, so yeah, that's not an insignificant amount of time, but you know, it's like you're sailing off. You can still see land. You might be able to swim back to shore. It's not too bad. It's not the end of the world if I lose this ante. You know, I'm not fully pot committed yet. Yes. So a lot of people decide to jump ship. They see something that they can't unsee, and it certainly affects their desire and their emotion. And people who are like chasing the spark doesn't survive the crisis of disillusionment. And so people who are chasing limerence, who are chasing the experience of being in love, that sort of infatuation, they can't actually know the other person. They can't, because other people cannot sustain that kind of fatuousness. They're far too annoying. They're far too disappointing. They're far too selfish and greedy and stinky. I mean, it's like we all are. And that's basically where love comes in, which is like, yeah, you're stinky and selfish and lazy, but I also am stinky and greedy and lustful. And so maybe we can kind of love each other despite our flaws as sort of a spiritual practice, which is not a very compelling argument. We want the
It is.
we want the Rome.
It is to me.
Really? How so?
It sounds realistic. It sounds fantasy free. I'm terrified of people's fantasies and of my own fantasies after years of bad relationships. It sounds great.
Yeah, you must have been through the ringer, Richard, because when someone turns to reality, they have to be thoroughly disenchanted with fantasy. And people, like reality is like looking at the sun, man. It's very hard to do on a sustained basis. People will fly into all kinds of fantasy, even temporarily. They'll go to the movies, they'll play video games, they'll watch cat videos on YouTube, they'll get drunk, they'll watch porn. I mean, they'll do all kinds of things to spice up the otherwise hollow and tedious existences that they find themselves in. Hollow in the sense of like in an existential fashion. It's like our lives are empty and we have to fill them with meaning. And meaning making is hard and difficult work, which is why most people just take ready-made meaning and identify with it as an introject.
Yes. It sounds like you're describing consumerism in some ways there, taking ready-made meaning and simply consuming it.
But you can consume religion. You can consume artistic movements. Like just because, the person who, wears the cross and mouths the Latin prayers, but doesn't understand the origin or the meaning of the rituals is basically a form of superstition, which is just an immature identification with a powerful protector, with a powerful authority. A person can not really have any kind of creativity or originality of his own, and so he'll identify with an artistic movement or a scene, and looking a certain way and going to the right places. And so there are ways of consuming that aren't just buying Porsches.
To that last statement, you said there's people who are solely pursuing limerence. Do you think there's any argument to be made that our culture encourages that kind of infantile stimulus seeking, and that we, in pursuing limerence, we end up consuming relationships and consuming people as consumer goods in some sense? Or have I gone too far, maybe?
No, for sure. I mean, just look at our popular music. It's like half the songs are about falling in love, the other half are about falling out of love. Like if you listen to our art, music, movies, to some extent popular literature, it's presented as though being in love, falling in love, is the paramount human experience. And that people who haven't felt that yet are somehow flawed, broken, or just miserably unfortunate. And it certainly was, it did inculcate a lot of unrealistic and incorrect ideas about women and relationships in my mind, personally, as a young man. Just to give one particular example, we like the idea of the grand gesture because it's very dramatic, and in so many movies and shows, the man succeeds in wooing his love interest by making some grand romantic gesture, which reveals the depth of his feelings, which the woman is then able to recognize and then move towards as her legitimate lover, right? And that's not how fucking women work. If you stand outside of her window blasting music from a boombox and she doesn't want to see you, she's going to call the police. She's not going to think that you're endearing. Don't tell me how I know that.
Where do you think these ideas come from? Is it Disney? Is it rom-coms? Who's put these ideas in our heads?
Yeah, probably Hollywood. It's dramatic. It's conducive to passion, and that's good because you also, to your point, have to get people into a heightened emotional state to make them better and more frequent consumers. Like psychologists are the ones who made Madison Avenue into what we know it as today. If you look at really old marketing, newspaper ads, they're all typically rational appeals to the superiority of the product in question. They don't fucking work. What people have learned is that if you want people to buy, you have to stimulate a feeling. And that's what companies actually sell. Like Coke doesn't sell soft drinks. It sells fun and friendship. Marlboro doesn't sell cigarettes. It sells manliness and sex appeal, shit like that. And this is another form of identification, which is that if I consume the right products, I can totemically participate in the associated emotional experience, which kind of works. It kind of works, especially when it comes to alcohol. A lot of people are sitting in really gross, dank dive bars right now with a shitty, lukewarm beer, but in their mind, they're thinking, I'm on a beach somewhere and I'm having fun right now. It's like, yeah, people can be hypnotized by this type of marketing. And probably the only thing that surpasses appealing to a man's lust is inculcating fear in him, which is also why it's a political tool. So what we're talking about are means of manipulating people. And it's very difficult to manipulate people rationally. They have to be rational to begin with to manipulate them rationally. And most people aren't rational. But all people are emotional, or they can be under the right stimuli. And that's how you get people to do what you want. You stimulate their emotions first.
I'm aware that we are drawing toward the end of our hour. Is there anything that you wish people understood more about psychology that they don't seem to be grasping at the moment? What would you teach the world if you could teach people something?
I know it's going to sound weird, but not everyone needs a therapist. And psychology is not a cure-all for all moral problems or all problems with living. Therapy in particular can do very good things for certain people with certain problems. But it's not the panacea that popular culture believes it to be. And I'm saying this because on some level to manage expectations. Because if you approach therapy thinking that it's going to solve all your problems, you're very likely to become disappointed and bitter and rejecting of the institution. And it's not so much that it's ineffective and incompetent or incapable. It's just that you got to stick within the realm of its mastery on some level. So by managing expectations, what therapy can and cannot do, I think people can use it more appropriately and have better experiences. That on some level, the important thing is to move forward. It's interesting. There's also this stereotype that therapy is all about like your childhood. Sometimes people will come into my counseling room and without me asking any questions, they'll just start telling me about their childhood, and I'll stop them. And I say, well, I thought that's what you wanted to hear. Don't you need to know that? Isn't that where my problem started? And I've said, well, it's entirely possible that they started there. They certainly started in the past. That's why you have them now. They had to start at some point. The origin is sometime in the past. But we can't change your past. The reason why you have your problems today is not because they had their origin in the past. It's because they're being maintained in the present moment. And that's good, because that's where we can intervene. You are doing things now or not doing things now that are keeping you stuck and preventing you from getting the things that you say that you want. And we're going to change those things now and moving forward so that you can move more in the direction of your goals.
I like that. I like that a lot. Dr. Orion, where can people find you if they would like to hear more of your excellent work?
Sure. I mean, as you mentioned, my biggest presence is on YouTube. I have a podcast called Psychhacks. In the description of every episode are links to all of my various services. On my website, you can get more information about my free weekly mailing list, my newsletter, booking a paid consultation, buying a copy of my book, The Value of Others, which is available in paperback, ebook, and audiobook form, or joining my private member community, the Captain's Quarters. That's kind of it. I'm working on other things, but that's sort of how you can get in touch with me if you're so inclined.
Excellent. Thank you very much, sir, for joining me. I really appreciate it.
This was great. Thanks for talking with me, Richard. It was great to finally meet you. You do very good work. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.